That tension that existed between all of the egos was part of it. Not necessarily a fun part of it, but it was a part of it. And those guys went at it on a constant basis. Backbiting, backstabbing, shit talking. Who could spin, who couldn't spin, who cleared the floor, who didn't clear the floor, who knew the true, masters, what their interpretation of the music was, what was his interpretation of the music. Did he have a clue? Did he have a clue?
I think, a lot of entities was like splitting us up, and we didn't know how big this music was blowing up over in Europe. Derek knew, Derek was the first one to go over it, so he knew. So, it was more like, trying to put the how can I say it, trying to control some shit he didn't know how to control.
Well, about the second wave of techno, definitely have to go with Rob Hood, Claude Young,
Shake
Shakira, Underground Resistance.
And that's a big crew, that's a big list.
Mike Banks, Jeff Mills, Rob Hood, they kind of woke people up to a darker, harder edge.
When I went to Berlin the first time in 1991, I walked into Tresor. I walked downstairs, and I walked into the most intense dance floor I had seen outside of Detroit. And they were playing one of my records, and I walked through the crowd, through the smoke, and who was playing it? Jeff Mills. It was one of the most powerful experiences of my life.
Mike Banks and I, we had made the very first release from Underground Resistance, which was a vocal track called Your Time Is Up. I took it home to my mother because I wanted her to see why we were staying up so late at night. So I let her hear it, and she listened to it, and she said, it's nice, but it needs more bass. So I thought, I think she's right, So we went back and we remixed it again. And she was right, and it sounded much, much better.
Mike and the UR posse, probably without those guys, for sure we wouldn't be here, because in the early days, Plus 8 and UR were really kind of the driving force for a little while. And we had a little bit of, Mike even says it now, it was like a little bit of sonic warfare going back and forth. They were shooting records out that were blowing our heads. And every time we thought we had come up with something really amazing, they'd shoot something back to us. We'd go back to the studio, I'd be like, Dan, man, we gotta make something better.
Mike Banks, who is somebody I admire a great deal, and one of my musical heroes.
I remember doing gigs, Mike Banks and myself, for little to no money at all. But it was the love of the music that kept us striving, kept us going forward.
He's got a personality on him. Mike is a man's man. He don't take no shit from nobody, And one of the most amazing things that Mike Banks has done was to invent and develop underground resistance. And the whole sort of mentality behind underground resistance is a real relation to the city itself. Because there's this mystery and this mystique about Detroit from the outside looking in. It's as if it's a city with tumbleweeds, and just like people just sort of, like the gunslinger comes to town mentality. I could remember going to Italy once, about 10 years ago. People were going crazy over underground resistance, and they weren't even there. It was as if somebody came along to Italy and just took a helicopter and just dropped a ton of t-shirts in Rome. Because every other kid I saw on the street had an underground resistance t-shirt. It was like almost like a cult. I guess you could say underground resistance is the sort of the Arkham Asylum of the techno thing here in Detroit. That's where all the guys go when they sort of want to touch the other side.
The rave scene kind of came in contact with Detroit City around '93, and it really kind of, literally and figuratively brought new life into the city. It seems like the size of the party is really important, and that has its own problems, of course. or it starts to become less about the music and more about a production. You know, that didn't mesh too well with Detroit techno culture. And they're breaking up one right now. And I think one of the people that helped define what Detroit raves and what the Midwestern feeling was all about was Richie Hawtin.
You know, the period when we started doing parties was at a key pivotal point in kind of the history of American parties and raves anyway. I was coming back from Europe at that time, going to places like England at the Lost Parties, going to Tresor in Berlin, and I was, you know, seeing that and reminiscing about the Institute, these dark black boxes with speakers and just like music. That's what it was always about. And so the reason we started doing parties in Detroit was to get back to, you know, the original concept. And in a way, you know, our parties were a little bit anti-rave. They were, you know, it was just fucking huge Ciro in Vegas, a strobe light, and because it became so pure again, they became really successful. Suddenly we went from 500 to 1,000, 2,000 people at the Packard building. You forgot who you were, where you were, and why you were there, and it became about this beat, this environment. And 8 hours later, we spit you out and you went home.
So we love Detroit techno.
Yeah.
We love techno.
Purists in Europe that you can still go play in front of 5,000, 10,000 people that they want to hear good music.
They treat DJs like superstars over there. It's really different, it really is. And then you come home and, you know, they think your name is Larry and you're a drug dealer.
A lot of them can walk down the street here in Detroit and people don't necessarily know who they are.
I think it's huge because once again, we've touched the world. I mean, you know, some of the artists that you see on this wall being exhibited, I mean, they're just back from Tokyo or London or Paris, doing shows, performing. They're in demand. People know that they're from Detroit. People know that this is really the mecca of this music, and that's huge. It's a huge statement for our city. You know, following the Motown sound, now it's techno.
The big difference between the scenes between the U.S. and Europe is that Europe has a real support level for the club. We don't have. We don't have beer companies, Amstel, Beck's, whoever it might be, supporting or backing a nightclub.
I think techno's a different story over there. I think the music has a life of its own and has a bigger presence in Europe.
Music, because it's music, is one of the only things that I feel that humans have that transcends everything. Language, culture, anything. So you can, especially when it's instrumental.
My life, Derek's life, Kevin's life, Kenny, Richie, all these guys, our lives are flying on airplanes.
I just played in Bosnia, South Africa.
All over Europe, Belgium, France, Netherlands, Austria, Swiss, Germany, and the United States.
Turkey, Russia, I've played in Jerusalem, South America.
In Berlin, you can still get away with some shit, and that's special.
I've done thousands of gigs. I've played in airplanes, I've played in bomb shelters, I've played underwater almost technically. I've played in the middle of a pool surrounded by water, people splashing water on my records, and I didn't like that because I'm really anal about